To make this crochet sweater, you're going to need a few different materials. The first is the yarn, of course. I'm using the Malabrigo Rios yarn in this red color. It's a 100% wool yarn, so it's really good for a sweater and for something for winter. You'll also need a darning needle, a pair of scissors, and a crochet hook that works with the size and weight of your yarn. I'm using a 4.5 millimeter crochet hook. So I'm going to talk about the process a little bit before I start getting into the actual instructions. This sweater is worked from the bottom up. You'll start with the waistline ribbing and then work your way up to the neckline. All of the ribbing is done using the single crochet and the back loop technique. And the rest of the sweater is the double crochet stitch. So you're going to do ribbing along the waistline for the part that goes around the shoulder and also the cuff on the sleeves. And then everything else, the body, is going to be the double crochet stitch. You'll also need to be able to do the slip stitch to connect the ribbing to the actual neckline. So if you can do all those, you can make this sweater. So let's get started. I'm going to start by making the front panel and then the back panel. So the front and back panels are not exactly the same, but they are pretty similar. So I'm going to show how to do each one separately. But to start with the front panel, we're working from the bottom up. The first thing we're going to do is create the front ribbing that goes along the waistline and then go into the double crochet stitches. So the height of the front ribbing is up to personal preference. You can make it as tall or as short as you want it to be. I've made this sweater before. I want mine to be 14 chains tall. So I'm going to create 14 crochet chains. 14. So this is how tall my front ribbing is going to be. And then I'm also going to chain one since we're doing the single crochet stitch. And skipping that first chain, you're going to work single crochets across this row. I just finished my last single crochet of that row. I'm going to chain one and then flip my work. And now I'm going to work single crochets across this row, but I'm only working into the back loop. So I just finished that last single crochet of this row. Once again, I'm going to chain one and then flip my work and single crochet across this row. And you're going to continue to work up single crochet rows until this end and the other end of the single crochets reach from one side seam to the other. And I'm going to come back when I'm at that point. So I just finished my front ribbing panel and this is how it's looking so far. I ended up doing 68 single crochet rows. I feel like from here to here, this reaches my side seam adequately, so I don't need to go on any further. But now I'm going to switch to doing the body portion, which is going to be the double crochet stitch. So in order to do that, you're going to chain two, which I have already done, and then I'm going to double crochet across this top area here. So if you look closely at the ribbing, you'll notice that there are like high points, the ribbing part technically. So like this one right here and this one right here, between those two pieces, I'm going to do two double crochet stitches. Yeah, so the next one I'm going to do two between here, two between here, two between here. And you want to keep it consistent. That way this ribbing portion, it doesn't stretch out too much, because if you were to do three in between each of the high points, it might get too wide. If you only do one, it might narrow it and make it like skinnier than what it's supposed to be. So I'm going to work across this entire row doing two double crochets in between each of these. So I just finished the last double crochet of that first row. So this is how it's looking. You can see that this top double crochet row, it tends to like make the ribbing spread a little bit like this, which is why, like as I said before, you don't want to do too many double crochets in between each of the raised points right here. you want to do the same number in between each. So 2 is a good number to keep the ribbing the same size. So from here, we're going to continue to work the double crochet stitches upwards until we get to about an inch below your underarm to start creating that armhole. So this first row, we just double crocheted across. This next row, I'm going to start and end with an increase. So I'm going to chain 2, and then I'm going to do 2 double crochets into this first stitch. And that's my first increase. And then I'm going to continue to work across this row. And I'm going to increase at the last stitch as well. So I'm on the last stitch of this row. I'm going to finish it out with an increase. And then I'll chain 2 and flip my work. So from here, you can see that this top row is like a little wider than the next one. So for the next row, I'm just going to do a stable row like I did on the first row. And I'm probably going to do the pattern of 2 stable rows, 1 increase, 2 stable rows, 1 increase. I don't want to increase every single row because then it's just going to get too wide. But I do need this piece to get a little bit wider because my chest measurement is wider than my waist measurement. So that part is kind of up to you. You need to just hold it up against you every couple rows to make sure that you're increasing the correct amount for what your measurements look like. If your chest is much larger than your waist, then you can increase every other row or every single row in order to accommodate that extra coverage that you're going to need. So I'm going to continue to work this up until it is an inch below where my armpit or my underarm fold is. And I'm going to come back when I'm at that point. So I finished the last row of this section. I ended up doing 15 rows total, and I increased every third row, as I said before. The first row was stable, increase, stable, stable, increase. So now for this next part, I'm going to start to shape the top of this row to create the armholes. So each row from this point is going to be a decrease row, and I'm going to start and end each row with 2 decreases. So from here, I already chained 2 off camera. I'm going to start this row with a decrease. And then I'm going to do a second decrease. And then I'm going to double crochet across this row until I get to those last 4 stitches. So I'm on the last 4 stitches of this row. I'm going to do 2 more decreases. This is 1, and then this will be 2. Chain 2, and then flip your work. And you're also going to start and end this row with 2 decrease stitches. So this is 1. I'm going to continue to work up these decrease rows until this panel reaches the top of my armpit. So when you have your arm down, the top of that fold, that's where you want this front panel to reach. And I'm going to come back when I'm at that point. I ended up doing 7 decrease rows. So from here to here is 7. I'm going to cut my yarn and then pull it through. Okay, so that is the front panel. I can't really fit in the screen. But now it's time to put this one to the side and then start working on the back panel, which is done pretty similar to this one, but there's a few differences. So the first thing you're going to do, which is the same as this one, as the front one. You're going to make the bottom ribbing area, but you're going to match it from side seam to side seam, but across your back. So the first one you were matching it across your stomach. This time you're going to do it across your back. And you need to do the same number of chains to start with as you did for the front part. So I started with 14 chains. I'm going to do 14 again. Okay, so I have 14. I'm gonna chain one because it's single crochets. And then I'm just gonna work these single crochets up until it is the length that I want it to be. And I'll come back when I'm at that point. I just finished the back bottom ribbing and I ended up doing 48 single crochet rows across. So this is how wide I needed it to be. I'm now going to switch to doing the double crochet part, the body of the sweater. And I'm going to follow the same stitch pattern that I did on the front. I'm going to increase every third row starting on the second. And I'm also going to make sure that I do 2 double crochets in between each raised part. So I'm going to chain 2 and I'm just going to double crochet across this row. Really, the only difference between the front and back panel is that the back tends to be a lot smaller than the front. It's a lot narrower. That's just because the front curve, your stomach curve tends to be like a little bigger than the back. Your back is usually pretty flat. So I just did the last stitch of this row. I'm going to chain 2, and then this row is going to be an increase row. So I'm doing an increase in this first stitch. And then I'm going to double crochet across and finish with an increase. So I'm going to continue to work this up until I have 15 rows. And the reason why I'm doing 15 rows is because that's the same number of rows I did on the front panel before I started shaping the armhole. So you want the back and the front to match in that way. I just finished my 15th row, and this is how the back panel is shaping up to be. You can see that there's a slight increase the higher up you go, and that's because I increased every third row, although it might be a little different for you. It just needs to follow the same increase pattern that you did on the front. So from here on out, I'm going to start to shape the armhole, and for the next however many rows that you do, every single row is going to be a decrease row where you start and end with 2 decreases. On the front panel, I did 7 decrease rows, so I'm going to do 7 on the back. But if you did, let's say like 8 or 9, then you also need to do 8 or 9. It needs to follow the same number of rows that you did on the front. So I already chained 2, and I'm going to start with a decrease. And then I'll do a second decrease. And then I'm going to double crochet across this row. And I'm going to finish this row out with 2 decrease. And I'm actually just going to come back when I'm at the end of that 7th row because I showed how to do these decreases on the front panel. So I just finished my last double crochet decrease. I already cut my yarn, so I'm just going to pull it all the way through to finish out this row. And now here's the back panel. I'm going to put this to the side for a minute because now I'm going to start to work on the sleeves. So for the sleeves, we start from the wrist or the arm cuff and then work our way up. So you're going to start it off by doing ribbing, pretty much the same way you did on the front and back panels. So I want my ribbing to be the same height as it is on the front and back panel. So I'm going to start by doing 14 chains. But if you want yours to be taller, then you're just going to have to create the number of chains that you want it to be. So this is 14, and then I'm going to chain 1 because we're doing single crochets. And then I'm going to do single crochet stitches back and forth across this row. And I'm going to continue to work it up until the cuff is long enough or wide enough to fit comfortably around my wrist. And I'm going to come back when I'm at that point. I just finished my 38th row and I feel like the ribbing is wide enough to fit around my wrist comfortably. So it goes like this. And there's a little bit of space, you know, it's not super tight. That's kind of how I want it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to slip stitch both ends along this edge to connect it. And then I'm going to start double crocheting in the round to create the actual sleeve. So when you get to the end of your row, you're not going to chain one like you normally would. You're going to join the ends together and then you'll slip stitch into every single stitch across this row. So I did my last slip stitch, and this is how the cuff is looking. It's round. So I'm going to chain two, and then I'm just going to work across this top edge. And similar to how you did the front ribbing and the back ribbing, you're going to do two double crochet stitches in between each raised part. So from here to here, two double crochets, here to here, two double crochets. So I reached my first double crochet stitch, and in order to join this, I'm going to slip stitch into that very first double crochet, and that joined my row. Now I'll chain two, flip my work, and I'm going to continue to double crochet across this row. So I'm going to continue to work upwards, not increasing or decreasing until the sleeve is tall enough to reach the fold of my underarm. But that is dependent on you. You'll have to try the sleeve on every few rows to make sure you don't need to increase. But if you do increase, you'll just increase within the first stitch of the row. You don't need to increase in the last stitch. But for me, I'm not going to increase or decrease. I'm just going to work straight up. And I'm going to come back when I'm at that point. I just finished my 37th row. I feel like the sleeve is long enough where it reaches the fold of my underarm, and I don't want to make it any longer. So now I'm going to start to shape the armhole similar to how we did it on the front and back panels. So if you did, let's say, 8 decrease rows on your front and back panels, you're going to do 8 decrease rows on the sleeve. I did 7. So for the next 7 rows, I'm going to start and end each row with a decrease stitch, and I'm not going to slip stitch into the first double crochet once I reach the other side of the round, because you want it to form kind of like a triangle for your arm to fit into. So from here, I'm going to chain two, flip my work, and then I'm going to start this row off with a decrease stitch. And then I'm going to double crochet across this row until I get to the last 2 stitches where I'll decrease again. I'm at the last 2 stitches of the row. I'm going to do another decrease, and then I'll chain two, flip my work, and also start this row with a decrease. I'm going to continue to work up these decrease rows until I have my 7, and I'll come back when I'm at that point. So I just finished my 7th row. I ended it with a double crochet decrease and cut the yarn and pulled it all the way through. So now this is how the sleeve is looking. And you're going to do a second one, doing it the exact same way you did the first one. And this is the opening for the armhole. So the next step from here would be to join all of your pieces together. So now that all the pieces are done, you have 2 sleeves and the front and back panel. You're going to start to join all of your pieces together. You can use whatever method works for you, but I'm going to join mine by using the slip stitch. So I already did one side of the front and back panel off camera. I did the slip stitch across the side seam, and now I'm going to show how to do it on the other side. So you're going to join your front and back, and you're going to reattach your yarn at one of the bottom corners. Luckily, this is where I started, so I have a little piece that I can work with to reattach. So I'm going to insert my crochet hook into one of the corners. And in this corner, and then I'm going to slip stitch across this row. So you're not going to slip stitch all the way to the very end. You're going to stop once you get to where you started doing those decrease rows. So for me, it was 7 rows down. So now I'm at the point where I can cut my yarn. I'm going to do one last slip stitch. I'm going to cut my yarn here and then pull it all the way through. So this part right here is the armhole opening. You're not going to close this part. You're going to attach it to the sleeve. So here are both the sides done. Slip stitch on here, slip stitch over here. All right, and now you're going to take one of your sleeves at a time. Okay. Actually, I'm going to flip this inside out for a second. Okay, and then I'm going to join my sleeves to the armhole opening. So right now I have the outside of the sweater facing me. I'm going to join the sleeves. How do I do this? Okay, I'm going to take a top corner of the sleeve and then attach it to a top corner of either the front or back. And then I'm going to slip stitch down here and then continue on until I get to the other side of the sleeve. So luckily there is an end piece right here. This is where I'm going to reattach my yarn. And you're going to cut the short pieces. Then I'm going to take my crochet hook and insert it into this top corner here. All right, so now I can cut my yarn. And I'm going to reattach the other sleeve off camera. So now that both sleeves are in their place, I'm going to work up the sweater a few more rows and then we can attach the ribbing, which is the final step, other than like tucking the loose ends. But I need to find where the center back stitch is. In order to do that, this is the top panel or the front panel because it's the bigger one, and this is the back panel. You're going to fold the back piece in half, and whatever is that center stitch, that's going to be considered your center back. You can put a stitch marker there. Or just reattach the yarn like I'm going to do. So I'm going to insert my crochet hook. I am going to do these next few rows still with my acrylic yarn. It's not going to be shown because this is where the ribbing is going to lay over top of. So if you want to use your scrap yarn, that's fine too. All right. I'm going to take the short piece and pull it all the way through so that it doesn't unravel. And then you'll chain 2 and then work double crochet stitches around this top, working 1 into every single stitch. So I'm going to do the first double crochet in the space where I attach the yarn. And then I'm going to continue to work around. When you get to the corner, you're just gonna work normally. So one double crochet before that corner and then one after. And try to get those stitches as tight as possible. This one does look a little loose. It almost seems like it's creating a hole, which I don't want. Yeah, so that's how that looks. And then you're just gonna continue around. And I'm gonna come back when I'm at the end of the row. So I'm at the end of this row. I'm gonna finish it with one more double crochet. And then I'm going to join the round by slip stitching into that first double crochet, chain two, and then flip my work. So for this next row, I'm gonna start it and end it with a decrease. And the next few rows are gonna be decrease rows. I'm gonna continue to work up decrease rows until the sweater is as tall as I want it to be. So that's a matter of personal preference, but I think I'm gonna do about 3, and then I should be good with creating the body of the sweater. I'm on my last 2 stitches of this row. I'm gonna finish with a decrease, and then I'm gonna slip stitch into that first double crochet and pull my yarn all the way through. So now I feel like my sweater is the height that I want it to be. I did 3 decrease rows and then of course the first stable row, and I don't need to work it up anymore. So I'm actually gonna put this to the side for a minute and work on the ribbing. So in order to do the over the shoulder ribbing, you have to decide how tall you want your ribbing to be. I know I want mine to be taller than what we did for the cuffs and for the waist part. So I did 14 chains to start that off. I think I'm gonna do 20 to start off this portion. So this is how long 20 chains is. I'm gonna do one more because we're doing single crochets, and then I'm gonna single crochet across this row. I'm at the end of the row, so chain one, flip my work, and then I'm gonna work single crochets into the back loop only. But you're gonna continue to do single crochet rows until the number of rows is equal to the number of double crochet stitches that you have on this top row. So I'm gonna come back when I'm at that point. I just finished the ribbing that's gonna go around my shoulders. I ended up doing 125 single crochet rows total because I had 125 double crochet stitches. And now I'm at the point where I can show how to attach the ribbing to the actual sweater. So you're gonna finish this out the way you would any other piece. You would cut the yarn and pull it all the way through. And then you're going to grab your sweater and find that center back stitch, which is where your loose piece, your end piece should be. So when we did the ribbing that went on the cuffs and the waistband, it was really important that we would do 2 double crochet stitches in between each raised rib part. But for this part, you're gonna follow like a similar rule where for each raised part, you're gonna work into 2 double crochet stitches from this previous row. And when you slip stitch across, because that's how that's how I'm gonna join it. But if you prefer to do it with the darning needle, that's totally fine. I'm gonna slip stitch across this row, attaching the ribbing to the sweater, but I'm gonna do a different pattern for the slip stitch, I guess. And the first one, I'm gonna do 1 slip stitch, but then when I get to my second stitch, I'm gonna do 2 slip stitches into the same space, and then 1, and then 2, 1, and then 2. And the reason why I did that is because the first time I made this sweater, I would do 1 slip stitch in each space like you normally would, but the sweater was just way too tight at the part where it sits at your shoulder. It was just really uncomfortable to wear. I could barely get into it. But I feel like doing the 1, then 2, 1, 2, 1, 2 pattern, it loosens it up a little bit. But doing 2 slip stitches into each space, it just ends up making it way too loose. I know that sounds kind of complicated, but it is really simple. So I'm going to show how to actually do it. So I'm going to reattach my yarn, my working yarn. All right, so I'm going to insert my crochet hook into this ribbing corner and then insert it into where I have the loose piece of yarn, that first stitch. And I'm going to do one slip stitch. Okay. And then working into that next space, I'm going to do two slip stitches into that same space, but working into the next double crochet. So this is one, and then this is two. Into that next space that I would join the pieces at, I'm going to do one slip stitch into that next double crochet, this one right here. I'm going to insert my crochet hook, and then working into this next space, I'm going to do two slip stitches. It's almost as if you're increasing, but I don't think you could actually increase. But yeah, so you see how it's one, then two, one, then two, but also managing to work your two double crochets in between these two raised parts. So going into the next space, I think I just did two. This will be one, and then this next one will be two. This is one, and then this next one is going to be two. Okay. And I'm going to continue to work across until I arrive back here. I'm back at where I started with the ribbing. So now I'm going to slip stitch the two ends of the ribbing together, and I'm just going to work down this row. All right. So now I am finished. The last step would be to use your darning needle to tuck all the loose ends. So everything that's like here and under here. And this part is completely optional. I'm not going to do it, but if you try the sweater on and you feel like it's not secure enough at the neckline, you can make a chain that's like super long, that is long enough to wrap around here and with a little space to tie it. And then you can lace it through this top row here underneath the ribbing, but that's completely optional. Yeah. So now I'm gonna cut to some images. So that's the end of this tutorial. Thanks for watching to the very end. I really appreciate it. If anything wasn't super clear, you can comment below, but please like, subscribe, share. I'm also on TikTok and Instagram as Kayla Baela. And if you decide to recreate this sweater, please tag me because I would love to see it. Thanks.